Welcome back, Illumineers, to the top 8. We just saw the interview with Brian. Congrats to him, who just made top 4 and is going to get that golden Mickey Mouse.
I know that the players are really itching for that golden Mickey. We talked about how great it looked. We looked at it earlier in the day, but something that I thought was really awesome from the interview was him talking about how he was on the draw all the way up here. We talk about how strong it can be to go first, but it's not impossible to win your games when you're going second. So, yeah, congrats.
Absolutely. He's playing that Emerald Steel, which I know we're going to see in our next matchup as well.
Right. We have 2 players we've already seen on stream that we actually got to cast. One of them is Emerald Steel, and the other one's Ruby Amethyst. We're doing Dom and Kurt, so I'm excited to get into that one. They will be playing for the Golden Mickey as well. So
absolutely. And they actually already played game 1. Kurt walked away with the win in that one.
Yeah.
So we're jumping right into game 2 of this match.
I'm really excited to jump into it, so let's go ahead and do it.
Let's go. So Kurt, of course, won game 1, as we said. So Dom is going to be on the play here.
Yeah, I assume Dom is going to choose to go first here. I don't know why you wouldn't choose that because of the advantage that does come with going first.
Sure. If you have the choice, like, is there ever, I mean, of course, you can win when you're on the draw, but is there ever any time when you would want to choose to go second?
Not currently, I don't think so. For the most part, you gain a lot of advantage going first just because you're able to play characters before your opponent. You're able to ink before your opponent. So even in this instance, I'm glad you brought this up. Dom, being the Emerald Steel player, is going to get to play 2 ink and play a Bucky before Kurt is able to respond. And so even something as simple as that, Dom being able to start discarding cards from Kurt before Kurt can respond might actually end up making the difference.
Yeah. So talk about this matchup here and what we can expect to see from both these players.
So this is a kind of difficult matchup for Ruby Amethyst because of that discard package in Emerald. You would think it wouldn't be too difficult because they're playing Amethyst, and Amethyst is known for card draw. The problem is that the Bucky discard engine is very strong at getting rid of a bunch of cards, so I think Kurt is likely looking for cards that are drawing cards, or if he gets to a point where he doesn't have many cards in hand, he's just trying to get up to 7 ink so that he can play Be Prepared if needed. And speaking of cards that draw cards, Kurt played the Magic Broom.
Yes. Oh, yes. The Magic Broom is a new card. We've seen Magic Broom before. We got real excited about seeing Magic Brooms last round, and here we see that one again. This is a new Magic Broom for set.
Well, being able to quest and then banish itself and draw a card.
Yeah, which is, a little bit different, but kind of gives you the same idea where you're filling your card back up, or filling your hand back up with that draw.
And I really like how Kurt is approaching this. I saw a couple Merlin Rabbits in hand too, and a few bounce characters. We see the Merlin Fox right there. So I think Kurt understands the assignment here. He knows that the Bucky is there. It's going to be oppressive. Dom is going to try his hardest to discard Kurt's cards, and we see Dom shifting Pegasus in on top of the little one. And so Dom can sing a song if he wants to. We see the grab your swords, and that's exactly what is going to happen to get rid of the Trinabox followers. Seeing what Kurt is doing, saying, okay, Kurt knows how to play this matchup. He's trying to draw a bunch of cards. I don't want to give him that opportunity with the Chernabog. We will play a really strong Pegasus character that will give Bucky evasive until the start of the next turn because Pegasus was shifted. And so now I can safely quest with Bucky, gain a little bit of extra lore, and stop Kurt from drawing cards.
Yeah. Now, grab your swords. We've talked about that one before. It's a really strong card, dealing 2 damage to all opposing characters. And he used it there just for one little character, and really early in the game. What are your thoughts on that move?
So I think Dom understands that Kurt is playing Amethyst. So Kurt has a lot of access to drawing cards. We just saw Kurt play Friends on the Other Side, which is a song card that lets him draw 2 cards. Like I said, there's 2 Merlin Rabbits in Kurt's hand also, which is basically draw 2 cards on a body. And so Dom knows, hey, I really need to get all of these cards out of Kurt's hand if possible so that I can take over this game and Kurt runs out of resources. And because of that, the Trinabox Followers is just another card that allows Kurt to draw cards. It allows Kurt to quest, which is pushing his win condition, and then get rid of it so that Dom can't interact with it and draw a card in the process. We also see Dom playing the Diablo, speaking of drawing cards. So Diablo is a really strong Floodborn character, which will trigger Bucky, meaning Kurt will have to discard a card. Kurt decided to discard the Madame M. Fox, but Diablo has a really strong ability that says when Diablo is exerted, on your opponent's turn, when they draw a card, you get to draw a card, which is really strong, especially into an Amethyst matchup where you have a bunch of cards that draw cards.
Yeah, that's so nice of Diablo to do that for you.
So nice of Diablo.
You get a card, I get a card too.
Exactly. Emerald's full of those cards that it feels like maybe they're doing something nice, but they're actually not. They're being really sneaky.
They're very sneaky. I've always said that Emerald is kind of that like tricksy, kind of ink color. I love all the inks kind of have their own personality.
Oh yeah, it's really, really awesome to see. And it puts Kurt in a really interesting situation here because we were talking about how Kurt needs to keep a full hand and draw a bunch of cards. Diablo's not exerted right now, but Diablo synergizes with Bucky, forcing Kurt to discard a card, but it also is going to let Dom draw a bunch of cards if Kurt tries to continue drawing cards. So there's kind of a... It's bad either way. If Kurt tries to continue to draw cards, then he's going to give Dom more cards. If he doesn't draw a bunch of cards, Dom's going to discard a bunch of cards out of Kurt's hand. So this is a kind of tough position for Kurt.
Yeah. Now, we see here he inked a Maui and played a rabbit to draw a card. Of course, Diablo's not exerted, so that doesn't apply here. But what was interesting, back on turn 3, Kurt chose to play, use 2 ink to play Friends on the Other Side. Of course, it's a song, but he had to use the ink, and he didn't play anything else out on the board besides drawing those 2 cards. How do you think that affects Kurt's position in this game?
I think it helps him a little bit with the Bucky being on board just because it gives him more options to discard. It gives him a couple extra turns to be able to ink. It's really, really important for Kurt to get up to 6 and 7 ink, so adding those extra cards to hand means you have a few extra turns of Dom playing Floodborn characters and making Kurt discard with Bucky to get to that point.
Yeah, and that Ursula, Deceiver of All, has made another appearance. That pop star. She wants to sing on the stage.
I feel like we have the trio here with Bucky, Diablo, and Ursula, Deceiver of All.
Yes.
We've seen how strong Ursula can be, being able to sing cards twice, basically. When Ursula sings a song, then it goes to your discard. You can then play it again from your discard and then put it in the bottom of your deck. So Dom can use that to sing damage cards like Let the Storm Rage On or Strength of a Raging Fire to deal massive damage to Kurt and also draw a couple cards in the process.
Yeah, it really does feel like a terrible trio. It is terribly awesome for Dom, and then terribly bad for Kurt.
Right, and we do see Kurt here playing discarding a King Undisputed from, he didn't have to discard there because of Ursula.
I missed what happened there.
I missed what happened. I missed what happened with the King Undisputed. But King Undisputed is a really cool card too, being able to force your opponent to choose a character and banish that card.
I think what he did is he used Rabbit to sing. Be King Undisputed. And so right now, Dom is deciding which character he wants to choose.
Okay, that makes sense. I think I didn't see the Rabbit exerted, so thank you. Yes, so a really great card. We talked about how this is a really strong board for Dom, and I feel like any of these cards that are banished is good for Kurt, so not a bad spot to play King Undisputed.
Yeah, what do you think Dom is going to choose here?
Oh man, it's tough, right? Because if you get rid of the Ursula, you can't sing those songs. Right now, Dom only has Sudden Chill in hand, so that's the only song that could be double sung. It would force Kurt to discard 2 cards. We also see that Dom has another Diablo in hand, so maybe you could get more discard going if you play that with the Bucky. So he decides to get rid of the Ursula and says, okay, I'll opt out of singing Sudden Chill twice. Otherwise, you have to get rid of the Pegasus, which is evasive and questing for a good bit. We see Dom already at 7 lore. You obviously don't want to discard the Diablo because the Diablo is drawing you cards. And then, of course, you don't want to discard the Bucky because the Bucky's discarding Kurt's hand.
Yeah, and I think the other good thing about Pegasus, if I'm not mistaken, Pegasus is a 5-cost character. So that's really, especially with him having evasive, he's a really strong singer in this deck.
Yes, exactly. A really strong singer, able to sing cards like Grab Your Sword, which we saw earlier and utilized in that way. Also has 2 lore, so quests for a good bit as well. But we do see Kurt respond by playing another Merlin Rabbit, and he has a 3rd Merlin Rabbit in hand too. These rabbits are bouncing all over the place.
They multiply, those rabbits.
They multiply. That's what I hear. And we'll see if the rabbit gets chased at all. I do see a fox in Kurt's hand. Of course, there's not enough ink to play the fox this turn, but we may see it eventually.
Yeah, so that second Diablo did come down, forcing Kurt to discard from his hand, and he chose Merlin Goat. And Kurt, how do you think Kurt is feeling right now with only those 2 rabbits on the board and Dom really having a strong board state right now?
Kurt is probably nervous, if I had to guess, especially with this Sudden Chill being played, forcing Kurt to discard a card. His hand's getting really low, and he really doesn't have any cards in hand to help him get rid of Dom's cards. Both the Pegasus and the Diablo is evasive, so Kurt can't challenge any of those characters because his characters aren't evasive. I don't see any cards like Be Prepared yet in Kurt's hand. Even if you do have a Be Prepared, he's only at 5 ink, so you need to be able to ink a couple cards. You don't want to ink the fox in hand because the fox can help you draw cards with Merlin.
I'm trying to look what's in Dom's hands, but I can't quite see what he has. Let's let the Storm Rage on.
Yeah,
And something else. But yeah, Dom is really in a good position right now. And we did see that third rabbit come down.
Yeah, the third rabbit does come down to keep drawing cards, finding answers. Kurt also drew another King Undisputed this past turn, so that wouldn't be a terrible card to sing again and force Dom to make a decision to get rid of one of the Diablos or the Pegasus, slow him down a little bit. We do see him ink the Sisu.
How much do you think Kurt is trying to keep on inking here, getting up to 7 ink, and hoping that he finds that Be Prepared?
I think it's a major priority for Kurt here, and it's even he's in a really difficult spot because he only has 2 cards in hand. I think this is actually why we see Kurt not singing Be King Undisputed, because Fox is the only card that's inkable in his hand. He knows if he played King Undisputed last turn, he's only going to have 1 card in hand. Dom very likely is not going to choose the Bucky to banish instead. So if Dom has a Floodborn character, which he has multiple in his hands to play, Kurt would be forced to discard this Madam M Fox. If he discards the Madam M Fox and then draws a Be Prepared next turn, that feels horrible because you only have 6 ink. You could ink the Fox the next turn if it wasn't discarded. So I think he's keeping the Be King Undisputed so that if Dom forces him to discard, he can discard that card, ink the Fox next turn if he manages to draw Be Prepared.
And that's exactly what we see him do. So there you go.
Yeah, there's a ton of flying creatures on,
there are.
on
That's
Dom's board.
4 evasive characters. And I mean, there's nothing right now that Kurt has to deal with those evasive characters.
Yep, Dom has 2 Pegasus and 2 Diablo. Both have wings, both hard to catch.
Yes, quite evasive indeed. I love this new Pegasus too. He's just beautiful. He's beautiful.
Beautiful and a really strong ability. If you're able to shift them and give everything else evasive, keep it safe for the turn. I mean, we see Dom is already at 14 ink. Kurt really needs something special here to come back from this because Dom has a ton of lore on board. Both of those Pegasus has 2 lore, so it looks like there's 7 lore on board. Currently, Dom would win next turn if Kurt can't get rid of anything.
Yeah, and it looks like he has a Sisu and a Madame Medusa in his hand, which he knows that's not going to do it.
Yeah, knows that's not going to stop Dom. So Dom does come back and win game 2. We get to go on to a game 3.
We get a game 3. These are 2 amazing players, super highly skilled, and 2 incredibly strong decks.
Yeah, it's 2 really good decks. I really love to see 2 iconic decks playing into each other.
Yes.
Ruby Amethyst has been a very strong deck since set 1.
Absolutely.
Has sometimes been the majority of the format. And so to see Emerald Steel, the new hot thing that people are playing, come in and fight against it, you know, it could be anybody's game. Kurt won game 1, Dom won game 2. We have a 3rd game to get on to.
Yeah, so should we get on to it?
I think we should. Let's go.
So we have game 3, and Kurt is going to be on the play this time because since he lost, right, I'm assuming he's going to choose to go first here.
Yes, I would assume that Kurt decides to go first here because of that going first advantage that we talked about earlier of just being able to be the first person to play cards, get things out, and respond to your opponent. Even something as simple as like Kurt has the ability to play some removal cards as other cards come out that he may want to remove from Dom. So there's a lot of advantage there. We will see how both of these players decide to alter their hands and then get on with the game. I think Dom only altered 2 cards.
Yeah, it looks like they're just finishing up what they're altering. And you know, not just altering, but also let's talk about inking while we're waiting for Dom to shuffle here. So that's one of the really important decisions each turn too. It's not just what you're playing, but what you're choosing to ink from your hand. Can you talk a little bit there about the thought process behind what you choose to put in the inkwell?
Absolutely. So in this card game, your cards are your resources. You have to choose a card out of your hand with the inkwell symbol, and you can put one of those cards into your inkwell every turn, slowly getting you more and more ink, and then you use your ink to spin and play your characters. This is especially important for Kurt because Dom is playing a discard deck. Usually you're just inking 1 card, playing 1 card a turn, sometimes 2 cards if you have a little extra ink, but at least to start it's just 1 and then 2. So you're usually getting 2 cards out of your hand at once after drawing a card. That means your hand's getting smaller and smaller every turn. You're only drawing 1 card a turn. So if Dom is discarding extra cards on top of that, it's very, very important that you ink cards you don't ink cards that you may need later in the game, because when they're in their ink, you can't get them back. And if you make a mistake by inking a card that you'll need later and don't keep that card, I mean, that can sometimes outright lose you a game.
Yeah. We saw that Diablo come down again from Dom, which is that card where he gets to look at Kurt's whole hand and know he can be prepared for that be prepared.
Exactly. Dom can be prepared for whatever Kurt has to throw at him. And Kurt has two brawls in his hand, which are really great cards to use against the 3-cost Diablo, because they can banish a character with 2 strength or less. And of course, the larger Diablo, the Floodborn one, only has 2 strength. With this Diablo being played, Dom knows, okay, I have this Diablo in my hand. I may not want to shift it too early so that Kurt doesn't have the opportunity to brawl it and banish it.
Yes, and that brawl really is one of the really great answers for Diablo because of the evasive ability that Diablo has. That Kurt, I don't know that there are any evasive characters in his deck.
I don't think there are. Sometimes there'd be Amethyst players like to play cards like Peter Pan Shadow, where there's a new Peter Pan that's chasing his shadow in the set that also has evasive and rush and can challenge those Diablos. So it would depend if Kurt's playing any of those. We haven't seen any of those in the past couple games, so I'm going to guess that he's not playing them. So you're totally right. Kurt doesn't have too many options to interact with these evasive characters outside of the characters like Madame Medusa that can banish them, or cards like Brawl that can banish them as well.
Yeah, and we saw the same turn 1, turn 2 moves from Kurt. He did banish that magic broom when he played Chernobog's followers, and I'm guessing that we'll see him maybe choose to banish Chernobog's followers here.
Yeah, and this is where we really get to see the differences of going first versus going second, because this is the same opening except they were swapped.
Yes.
Now Kurt gets to ink a card and play a 3-cost card, or up to a 3-cost card this turn, whereas before Dom was able to shift that Pegasus before, right? Or I think that was it. Shift Pegasus, sing swords, and take out the Chernobog's followers. So this is where we can see a little bit of a difference, and we do see Kurt drawing 3. This is exactly his opening previously as well.
And we did see the Bucky come down, that squirrel making that early appearance again, and we know that there's so many Floodborn characters in this deck that Dom could have, but you know, it's really anything could happen.
Yeah, one of the really strong things about Emerald Steel is that every single character that's 1 cost that they play has a shift target. So as long as you can play 1-cost character and you find its counterpart, like we see here, Dom shifts the Diablo by discarding an action card, which is Sudden Chill. It's going to force Kurt to discard one of his cards, but Kurt is playing really well against this, having paid for the 3 ink just to play friends and draw 2 cards this past turn, so that he still has plenty of cards in hand to work with for the next couple turns, getting his ink up so that he can actually play those cards that he's drawing later in the game.
Yeah, it looks like Kurt's hand had 2 Be King Undisputed and 2 Brawls, and he did decide to discard one of those Be King Undisputed. What do you think of his choice there?
So I think Kurt actually has 3 Brawls,
which
is really
have 3.
crazy.
You're right, because he just used one. He still has 2 in his hand.
Right, and so I think Kurt realizes that the Brawl is going to do a lot of damage to the Ursula to see Revolve or a Diablo that comes down. That hits a lot of cards in Emerald, and so he wants to keep as many of those as possible, whereas with King Undisputed, when he plays it, it's good at removing stuff, but Dom gets to choose what gets removed. So if Dom plays a 1-cost character that he doesn't really care about being banished, it can make the King Undisputed a little bit worse of a card. So it's also uninkable. So normally when you are forced to discard cards, you just discard the uninkable cards that you can't really play yet or are too slow. We see the Be King Undisputed and the Snake being discarded as well after Ursula sung Sudden Chill, I think.
Yeah.
And that's basically because both of those cards are hard to play. Be King Undisputed, like I said, is uninkable, and Madame M. Snake, you have to have another character in play to even play the card, so might as well get rid of the card if it's not any use to you.
Yeah, and we didn't see their full deck list, but I know something else that players have to keep in mind is the number of uninkable cards that they even have in the whole makeup of their deck.
Absolutely. If you have a bunch of uninkable cards in your deck, you're more likely to draw them, and if you continue to draw uninkable cards, then it makes it even more difficult to ink every turn. You're having to ink cards you maybe don't want to ink, and so we do see Kurt ink a Madame M. Fox, play a Maui here, and get rid of that
Bucky.
squirrel. Dom got a
Yes.
little greedy, questing with Bucky this past turn, and Kurt is taking advantage of that.
Yeah, that did feel like a little bit of risk. The Ruby Amethyst deck has a few characters with Rush, at least Spider-Man Fox and Maui.
Right. Madam Fox and Maui are two of the main ones, and they're ones you always have to think about.
Yeah.
As soon as Ruby Amethyst gets up to 3 ink, you have to consider that Fox. Then, of course, when they get up to 5 ink, you can almost guarantee that Maui will come down if you exert a really strong character.
Absolutely. And having that Maui on board, I think, is going to be just great for Kurt overall to deal with some of these characters that Dom has.
Absolutely. The Pegasus we did see come down. It wasn't shifted, but it has evasive. So it is a counter to the Maui in that Maui has Russian Reckless, but not evasive, so it can't challenge it. But we are seeing these brawls put in some work. The second brawl out of the 3 in Kurt's hand was played to get rid of the Ursula Deceiver of All, so that Dom can't sing any cards extra like Sudden Chill or let the Storm Rage on to gain advantage in that way.
Yeah, and it looks like Dom is now down to just 1 card in hand, which is a Grab Your Swords. That Diablo, got banished a few turns ago, and I bet that Dom is really wishing he had that about now for the cards.
Yeah, because Dom is really low on cards right now. Like you said, he played out the Robin Hood, which isn't really card draw, but if Robin Hood is banished in a challenge, then you get to draw a card. We do see Kurt play a Queen's Castle
and
here.
Move Maui over there.
Which I really like. Speaking of card draw, Kurt's also a little bit low on cards, only 2 in hand currently. Luckily for Kurt, there's no Bucky on Dom's side of the board, so discard is a little bit less likely. But of course, you don't want to have few cards in your hand when playing against Emerald, so Kurt plays his Queen's Castle, which is going to be difficult for Dom to banish because Robin Hood and Pegasus only have 3 strength, so they're not going to be able to challenge and banish the Queen's Castle this turn. Because Maui is at Queen's Castle, when it becomes the start of Kurt's turn, he gets to draw an extra card.
Yeah. And that Maui, of course, even though Pegasus was exerted, Maui does have Reckless, which means he must challenge an opposing character if able. But he's not able to challenge an evasive character. And so he's just kind of hanging out there at the Queen's Castle.
Exactly. And Maui has just enough strength to banish the Robin Hood as well. So if Dom decides to exert the Robin Hood to challenge the Queen's Castle, to start putting a little bit of damage onto it, trying to get rid of it, because the Queen's Castle is a really strong card. It has Lore. It allows Kurt to draw extra cards. You want to get rid of it. Maui, it will be required to challenge the Robin Hood back. And that is what we see Dom do, challenge with the Pegasus and the Robin Hood into the Queen's Castle, putting 6 damage on it, setting the Ursula Deceiver up for the next turn to deal the 1 damage needed to banish the Queen's Castle.
Yeah. I'm just imagining Maui hanging out in the Queen's Castle, and it's just so humorous to me.
Do you think Maui and the Queen would get along? No, he seems kind of full of himself.
He does seem kind of full of himself, and the Queen is also full of herself.
Exactly.
I think they would butt heads a little bit.
That is so funny to think about. I love the new location mechanic for that reason. Just thinking of all the fun interactions of characters being in the same room together, and maybe what they would talk about or how they would interact with each other.
Yes. Yeah, he's going to shapeshift into something in there.
Yeah.
We see it. Be prepared.
I love this play from Kurt because Queen's Castle's location. Be Prepared is a song that we've had since set 1 that simply says banish all characters. Well, Queen's Castle is not a character. It's a location, and so it's a way for Kurt to completely remove every character from Dom's side of the board. He loses all of his characters, of course, too, but that means Dom isn't able to challenge the Queen's Castle. It's going to be around for another turn, gain that extra passive lore on the card.
Yeah. Now talk a little bit about what we saw Dom just do. He played Let the Storm Rage On, but there were no characters.
Right, and he did it again. So this is an interesting ruling in Disney Lorcana that might be a little confusing. You don't actually have to have a target for Let the Storm Rage On to play the card. The first part of the card says deal 2 damage to a chosen character, then draw a card. In Disney Lorcana, you do as much as you can. So Dom plays Let the Storm Rage On. There's obviously no character to choose, so no character gets chosen, and then he fulfills the rest of the card, which is draw a card, and he's literally just playing it to draw extra cards and find answers to what Kurt is doing.
Wow, we have a second Queen's Castle come down, which feels really big for Kurt.
Really, really big. Dom, I don't believe is playing any cards like Rise of the Titans. I don't know that I've even seen any Along Came Zeus's, which are 2 really popular steel cards that people play to get rid of locations. They deal damage to locations as well. as long as Kurt is able to keep characters off of Dom's side of the board, they're not going to be able to challenge into these Queen's Castles, so you're not going to be able to put damage on them. It's going to be really tough for Kurt to come back to this.
Oh, wow. So what we saw just happen is Kurt played Cusco, then he played Snake to bounce Cusco back, and then replayed Cusco again because he had enough ink.
Right, and this is what I was talking about it being really important that Kurt gets to these high ink counts, because now he can start doing a lot of stuff that his deck wants to do. He was able to make that awkward play of having to play a card, bounce a card, play it again, but then he still had enough ink to move it to the Queen's Castle. So, and he moved it to the non-damaged Queen's Castle.
Absolutely.
So it's more likely to survive until the next turn. And then if it does, Kurt's going to draw 2 extra cards because of the Queen's Castle ability that just says you draw an extra card for every character at the location.
Yeah, and drawing 3 cards at the start of your turn, like that's really big.
That's huge. I mean, Dom's entire deck is revolved around discarding your opponent's hands so that they don't have answers to what you're doing. And Kurt has done a really great job this game of continuing to draw cards, not letting Dom getting him down to that point. I mean, if Kurt gets to draw an extra 3 cards, that sets Dom back a far way, especially since there's no Buckies in hand. There's no other ways for Dom to discard Kurt's cards currently.
I think the hard thing for Dom that we're seeing is that the last few turns, he's really just had almost a handful of songs. He did get that Robin Hood and the Aladdin that we saw played last turn, but he just has songs, and all his other characters, the Bucky, the Diablo, the Ursula, Kurt had the answers for, and Dom hasn't been able to find anything else.
Yeah, it can be a little bit difficult for Dom to come back from a position when all of those key characters get banished, like you mentioned, the Diablo and Ursula and Bucky. So Dom wasn't able to find any extras, and Robin Hood on his own is a really strong card, but faced with what Kurt is doing and the ways that he has access to Ruby cards to banish all of the cards that Dom keeps playing, keeping Dom from challenging his locations and characters. Kurt's doing a really great job of keeping Dom from getting ahead too far. Kurt's pushed his lore lead going all the way up to 14, may have just quested there up to 16 as well. Yeah, and if Dom can't get rid of the Queen's Castle this next turn, which on board currently there's only 6 strength, the Queen's Castle has 7 total, and the Aladdin gets banished just now, Kurt's going to gain 2 extra lore off the Queen's Castle. We see a really cool play where he quests with the Cusco, plays the Madam and Fox to bounce the Cusco back to his hand, and then replay the Cusco. So now the Cusco's readied. The Cusco can't be challenged. So there's 2 lore from the Cusco, 2 lore from the Queen's Castle. That could be game if Dom doesn't have a response.
Yeah. What response? I see he does have that grab your swords in hand. Is that the right move here, you think?
It would be a pretty good play because Cusco, of course, only has 2 willpower. It does have that great ability of being able to draw a card when banished, so you would be drawing cards for Kurt essentially, but you have to. I mean, they have lore on the cards. You have to get rid of them. Kurt is playing Amethyst. He's already up at 16. You don't like that. You know he's playing goats. He can just play the goat, gain some extra lore when it enters and leaves play. So I think the decision here is whether or not Dom needs to sing Grab Your Sword with Robin Hood, if he needs to just play it outright. And he also has we don't talk about Bruno, so you could use that to get rid of a card as well. It's a difficult position here because the Robin Hood could challenge the Snake, banish the Snake, could do a little bit of damage to the Queen's Castle, but then of course you don't have the Robin Hood to sing Grab Your Sword either, and you'd be using a lot of ink you wouldn't otherwise be able to use.
Yep, and it looks like he's bringing that Grab Your Swords up to the front of his hand. He's really thinking about it here.
Yeah, I think it's something he's going to need to do just to slow Kurt down. I mean, this is a really tough position for Dom. Dom only has 6 lore, so he really needs to build a board, but before you can build a board, you have to take care of Kurt's board. Kurt being all the way up at 16, there's a lot of things that Kurt can play, especially with all the cards that he's drawing, to push him over to 20.
Absolutely. Yeah, he has to have an answer here, otherwise Kurt takes the game next turn.
Yep. And I believe these matches are untimed, and so Dom is just taking as much time as he needs to figure this out, make sure he's making the absolute correct plays or not making any misplays, because, I mean, they're playing for lots of really cool stuff.
They are, yeah. Not just the Golden Mickey, but a chance to also play to go into to become the champion of the Lorcana Challenge.
All right, we do see Dom play Diablo and then challenge the Snake with Robin Hood. So Dom will gain 2 lore because Robin Hood banished the Snake in that challenge. And then we see him play the Strength of a Raging Fire, dealing 2 damage to one of the Cuscos, making it so that Kurt is only going to be able to gain 3 lore this turn, going up to 19. But if Kurt has that Merlin Goat, That's going to be game.
Yes. I also just realized how much ink Kurt has on his side of the board. He does have quite a lot, and he just has a lot more options here. If he just quests with Cusco, he'll go up to 19, and it feels like this game is Kurt's at this point.
Yeah, at this point, Kurt can just play another character, and then Dom has to get rid of that character that's readied. The only way he can really do that is through removal actions in Steel. We see Madame Medusa coming down to banish the Robin Hood, so the Robin Hood won't be able to challenge. You normally,
Another
man,
Queen's Castle.
oh, the second Queen's Castle is rough. Yeah,
wow.
Dom knows that there's nothing he can do to stop that.
Well played. You know, I know Kurt took game 1, but Dom came back strong in game 2.
Yes.
But then Kurt was just able to really dominate this third game.
Absolutely. I think you can really see the power of both of these decks, both when the Bucky engine is online and Emerald's doing its thing and discarding all your cards, making it so that Kurt can't play anything that he's drawing. And then you also see how strong it is for Kurt's deck. If that isn't the case, he is able to draw a bunch of cards, keep a hand that he can work with, and then use that later into the game to keep control of the board, play those Queen's Castles, and make it all the way to 20.
Absolutely. Well, Ruby Amethyst, as we know, it's been around since set 1, and it is still
It ain't going
making
anywhere.
waves. It's not going anywhere. Congratulations to Kurt for getting that golden Mickey.
Yes.
And we're going to go to a break, and then we'll be back with our top 4.
Don't go anywhere.